Good
This
evening, everyone.
conference will
How are
now
you?
be recorded.
Doing well. It's a beautiful night. Thank you for coming to one of two town hall discussions that we have as it relates to public infrastructure. I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to be a part of this with us, as staff has done a tremendous amount of work to gather some information from which the community can make some decisions. Just to be clear, the information that we're presenting this evening is relevant only to public infrastructure. We are happy to answer other questions and get back with you if necessary, but that's kind of what we're going to contain it to this evening as best as we can. Now, just for clarity's sake, this is not a council meeting, so there is no posted agenda. Public infrastructure was the named topic for the evening. We might be able to stray a little bit into a few other things if it comes up and it's related to the topics that we have on hand this evening. But we do have a lot to cover as it relates to our water and sewer systems
Be
and our
quiet, let
infrastructure
me
in
talk.
general, of educating the public in Rome so that you all can make whatever decision you choose to make at the polls on May the 4th. For those of you who are just joining us, can you put up a PowerPoint for me, ma'am? I do have a very quick PowerPoint, and then we're going to keep this very informal, and I'm going to open up the floor to questions. You will see that we have myself and Shayna Odom, our city secretary, is here with us. Jesus Dominguez here on my right, for you all who do not know, is our public works director. We have Chief Scott Estes of the fire department, and we have Chief Eric Davis of our police department on hand that can also answer questions for you. Now, part of the reason why this is not a council meeting is because if council is in session, the meeting is very formal. The agenda is printed. You can really only discuss the things that are listed on the agenda. And in council meeting settings, it is not a give and take between the audience and between the council. A council meeting is meant for the council to conduct the business of the city only. This is why this is a staff-driven meeting. You may see a couple of council members in the audience, but however, if we reach more than two of them in this audience, I will send one of them home because then we will be at quorum and they cannot do that. So just be mindful that there are some limitations as it relates to your council members being at this type of a meeting. Um, but we do welcome them because they are residents as well, and it's very helpful to them to hear the give and take and the questions that you all have as citizens of Rome. So we're going to start tonight with this discussion as it relates to public infrastructure, and I'm going to jump into some of the meat and potatoes of the information that most people are going to want to know because it will impact the tax rate in Rome. We have a very substantial infrastructure system that was put in place over a variety of years, some going back 80 years for some of our water lines, that needs to have some attention, in my opinion, as your city manager. So we are going to present some things to you this evening and answer those questions as we go along. But I want to start with a broad overview of the propositions that are on the ballot. So you will see that Proposition 1, we were very specific and very deliberate in the bonds that we placed on the agenda for this year because we've had some concerns in the past from residents that the city has put bonds on the ballot and people either didn't understand exactly what they were for or they were concerned that the money was going to be used for a different project than what was stated on the bond. So what I did with the advice and consent of council was we were specific. So Proposition A is for water wells only. We have an estimated cost of about $3 million that could potentially drill us between 2 or 3 water wells, which would be added to the current water capacity that we have and that we receive from our vendor, Walnut Creek Special Utility District, and it would also be added to the 4 functioning or semi-functioning wells that we have right now. We have one that's in remediation, so we only have 3 wells online at the moment. So that proposition, if it is approved by the residents, would only be to drill those said water wells. You cannot, and I did list in the FAQ documents that you have in front of you this evening. We've had some questions about what that bond money can be used for. I know there's been some discussions in social media and amongst small groups that this money may be used for salaries or other projects as needed. This can't be used for anything other than what's stated on the bond document, or people like myself and Jesus are going to go to jail. And we don't have any interest in going to jail. So you do only use the bond money for what it is said. There are bond covenants associated with each issuance. There are people who watch the bonds or overlook the bonds as they are issued. So you have a bond counsel. So the city has a bond attorney. You also have a financial advisor. The people who buy the bonds are going to get reports as to how those are progressing and how the city's paying them back. So they really cannot be misappropriated. So just to kind of set the groundwork there to be clear. Proposition B is the bigger bond that we have on the election cycle for this May. That relates to the West wastewater treatment plant. You all will see in this room there are several photos that we have taken within the last couple of weeks of that said wastewater treatment plant, and we will get into some of the particulars of the plant. That's for $11 million. Proposition C is approximately $3.5 million that would be used to replace what is called sanitary sewer lines within the city of Rome. We have several miles of old clay pipes. Some of it in Old Town. We have other sanitary sewer lines in other parts of the community that have failed. We also have manholes that need attention. We have several, we have over 100, don't we? Like 150?
Yes, ma'am, overall.
Yeah, of manholes, which, you might not think that for a city our size, but each one of those manholes is a water infiltration point for your system. So the water that we get from a rain event will go into the manhole if it's not properly sealed and maintained, and it will overwhelm the plant like the pictures that you see in front of you here. And we'll get into some of this as we go along in this discussion. But when you put a proposition on an election ballot and you say it's for quote unquote I&I, which is inflow and infiltration, most people look at you and think, why does that matter? This really can't be that big of a deal. But for the rain events that have overwhelmed that West plant, 90% of them have been a result of a rain event that has gone in and it has overwhelmed. And Jesus can talk to you about that just a little bit more as we get into the presentation, but it causes your sewer plant to overflow, and we end up with raw sewage on the ground. So those are offenses that TCEQ will monitor, and they will come out. Chief Debus is holding up from the latest rain event that we had. You will see that that is actually raw sewage in the kind of brownish white that you see there on the ground that overspilled from the last one that we had to report to TCEQ. So I'll get into some of those details as we go along, but I wanted to give you an overview of what was actually on the ballot for the bonds. And then the next question I usually get asked as a city manager is, what is that going to mean to us financially? And so rather than save that to the end, let's go ahead and get into it so you all will have a good understanding of what the implication will be for your taxes. And yes, Mrs. Mize, feel free to take any photos. No, this presentation will also be on the website this evening, so you can get to any of the photos or any of the information as it relates to the presentation itself. We will also post the pictures that you see around the room as we go along. Yes, sir. Come on in. 3 count. Mayor doesn't count for a quorum. Thank you, though. Okay, so looking at the tax rate estimates. Chief, can I borrow that microphone on you first so I can move over to this area? Thank you, sir. Is that working? Can you all hear me? So when you look at the water wells themselves, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, if the city passes Proposition A, it would be about 7 cents on the tax rate, which is about, for a $300,000 home, it's about $20 a month. And for a $400,000 home, it's estimated at about $28 a month. If the community passes the wastewater treatment plant or Proposition B, it's a 26 or 27 cent tax rate because that is the larger of all the 3 bonds that are on the ballot. That'd be about $65,000 for a $300,000 and about $84 a month on a $400,000 home. If the sewer lines or the I&I on Proposition C passes, it's about 8.5 cents on the ballot, $22 a month and $29 a month. And then you'll see down here the total is right about 42 cents all in for all 3 of the projects. One of the things that the community needs to be aware of and know is the town or the city also has 2 bonds that are about to roll off. So we will pay off about 5 cents of the tax rate in this current fiscal year, so that will come off our numbers. And then in the next fiscal year, we will pay off another 7 cents of the tax rate. So currently, Our debt tax rate is about 12 cents. And within the next 14 months, all of that will be paid in full. So we will be starting basically at ground zero for debt for the city. One of the other things to be mindful of is when cities issue debt, the first year you only pay interest. So the debt rate that you see shown here is the full debt rate. So it'd be not assessed until the second year. It's very confusing when you don't spend your day working in these numbers. So I tried not to overload the slide with a bunch of extra information, but if the debt is approved and if the projects are approved, basically council calls the election. It is handled in May. The debt is not issued until August. In the next fiscal year, so the next August, we'll pay an interest only on the projects. And then the year following, you would pay the full amount, which is the 42 cents. So we're not going to automatically in May move to a 42-cent extra tax rate on your INS portion or your debt. It doesn't work like that. You slowly move into it. And in that time that we're going to slowly move into that, you're also going to be paying off 2 bonds that the city has left outstanding. So you need to be mindful that it's not an apple and an apple that we're comparing, and you have to know that there are a lot of varying figures as it relates to these projects. But just looking from here, this is what we have received from our financial advisors team and our bond counsel. So what I'd like to do is pause and answer any questions that you will have, and if you don't, we can move on into some of the others, and you can kind of formulate those questions as we go along. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the 12 cents that we're going to get paid off, are we going to put that on to the 42 cents, or can you do that?
You can't do that. So what it ends up doing is it just reduces the overall tax rate for the city. So as you pay it off, you can't continue to assess the tax and then put it for another project. That's why those bond covenants are so restrictive. So we've paid off a couple of bonds in the last bit of time, and when that happens, the debt rate just goes down as a result. That's a great question. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So when you pay off the 12
Mhm.
cents, that figure goes down? Or
So
no?
then that's really a great question as well. You would logically think that, but because the 3 projects together are 30 cents in total for the first year, but then as you move into the full payment, it becomes 42 cents. So we're going to have some things passing. Otherwise, the total tax rate would be closer to 55 cents if we weren't paying off the 12. Does that make sense?
So it's pretty much a push, right?
You're going to have a push of some of it. It's not going to be a complete wash one for the other. But again, if we do find some other, and this is another question that we received, is if we have these estimated numbers on the debt and it doesn't require all of that, say for instance, if we're able to install the plant for less than the 11 million, we're not going to issue extra funds. It doesn't do any good for the city because you can't use it for anything other than the plant. So we're hopeful that these numbers are generous estimates and that we may not need to issue all of that debt that's shown on the proposition. So the city can issue up to, but not exceed what the voters approve.
Since this is infrastructure, why can't we get any grants?
That's a great question. We have submitted grants for these projects in the past. You'll see that on your FAQs, especially the West Wastewater Treatment Plant. When we submitted that, we were not selected as a finalist for that particular project, and there's a variety of factors that go into it. Some of it will hinge on how many grants you've received recently and in the past and how many you currently have outstanding. We currently have a CDBG grant for a well 6 replacement or rehab of about $350,000. So when you have outstanding grants, it lowers your score when you apply. They go for cities that may be in worse condition than Rome is, or that may have a lower median income than Rome does. And there's only so much money within the state's budget that they allow for that. So we have applied on the West Plant and we were not selected. The I&I issues, our engineer is not aware of any grants that exist for that. And the water wells are a new conversation that we've had with council. So I don't know of any that exist. There may be, but I don't know of any. The one thing I do know is we've spent some time looking at those grants and bonds grants and low interest loans from the Texas Water Development Board. And it's a 2 to 3 year process from application to finding out if you're awarded and getting the funds. And honestly, we don't have that kind of time with some of the issues that we're dealing with now. And we'll talk to you about some of that with the West plant as we get into that part of the presentation. Mrs. Mize, you had a question?
Yes.
It doesn't sound very loud, does it?
What is the timeline on these bonds? How long out are they going?
It will depend on the interest rates. They can be issued for 30 to 40 years. Most cities generally look at that from a 30-year perspective. The nice thing about municipal bonds is they can often, in the majority of cases, be paid off early with no penalty. So most cities that I've worked for look at this as a 30-year bond because it generally spans the life of the asset. Any other questions about this?
Since the West water plant is not sufficient now, if this bond fails, and the state comes in, are we going to be paying at a higher rate?
It's possible. We'll get into some of that as we get further in the presentation.
Since these are infrastructure items, and if we were to roll them into the usage rates that we pay now, what would that impact be? If
We
we
haven't-
raised rates high enough to cover this in that source of payment.
In my opinion, no. I think that would be an extremely large rate hike that we are not going to be able to sustain in that regard. My opinion.
Proposition B. Oh, working for real? Okay. Proposition B. Did the city apply for grants? It says the city submitted a funding request for this project to the Texas Water Development Board. We were not selected for funding. When was that accomplished?
I don't have the answer for that. I asked the engineer today from Kimley Horn, and he did not give me the date specific. But I'm assuming it's from whenever we've recently hired them coming forward. Yes, sir.
So if we have a total failure on the West plant, the residents in Old Town Rome, do we have it to where we can use the East plant?
No.
We're totally out of luck.
There's a portion of Old Town that some of the homes are diverted to the East plant, but most of them gravity feed to the West plant. And Mr. Dominguez can weigh in whenever you'd like, sir.
In order to move wastewater from the West plant to the East plant, you'd have to put in the lift station and the pump stretching all the way across town to BC or to Main Street. Sorry about that. And lift stations are not cheap, and laying the pipe of that size going under 287 and everything would not only be a long process, but it would be very costly.
One of the things we also found in looking at some of our old documents is before the West plant was put in, so in mid-90s, we did have a substantial lift station on that side of Rome that lifted the sewage up over the ridge and gravity fed it into the East plant. A lot of times the East plant would fail, much like the West plant is doing now, and it had Imhoff lagoons and other things from which to deal with the sludge and the matter that needs to be dealt with as it relates to a septic or a sewage plant. And we had to upgrade it because it was having its own issues. The East plant is now currently in pretty darn good condition. The city did issue about $2.5 million, I believe, in debt in 2019, 2020, and we upgraded that East plant. And now it is prepared that if we have any growth on the east side of the community, the developers will pay for any expansion on that plant. The city will not, in my opinion, be paying for that. All right, so looking ahead at just a general overview of our systems themselves, you all may realize we have a water system which has ground storage tanks. I'm sure some of you have either heard or seen photos of some of our GSTs as it relates to the rust and the failure of some of those tanks, and probably have questions about the plan for those, and we will get to that as well. We have water wells. We have the elevated tank that you see out here on 287, and we have many, many miles of water lines. And those are the ones that I'm saying go back sometimes 80 years, 70 to 80 years for their construction. We have the wastewater systems. We are a unique community. The topography of Rome is beautiful. I think most of you have heard me say this before. You can see in Rome for miles, and it's gorgeous and one of our greatest assets. But it is a really big challenge when it comes to wastewater because cities our size generally operate one plant for the most part. We have to have two, one that gravity feeds to the west and one to the east. So those are some challenges that we have with our wastewater system. We have the I&I or the sewer lines that we discussed. We also have those manhole covers that we discussed earlier. Then we have the roadway systems that are comprised of roads that the city is responsible for, or the state, or the county. And often all of those get confused. We're not really talking about roadways today because our biggest projects are in our water and sewer system. And then we have storm drainage, which most of us don't think about because Rome is not a curb and gutter city. So we don't have a lot of the runoff go into the system that way. It really just feeds along the ground and runs into the various creeks that surround us. So that is a plus for us at the moment. You'll see behind me that we have had multiple studies done since 2015, 2016 timeframe. We will get to a portion of our conversation where in the West Plant, the majority of our problems started in 2015. We had multiple rain events for the West Plant in 2015 that triggered the enforcement notification from TCEQ that we've still been dealing with to this day. So as a result of that, the city wisely invested in these studies to give us a roadmap forward. And you can see that some of these have been done more than once in a variety of years. The challenge that we've had in Rome is we've not really moved on any of the projects that were recommended in those studies, and that can be due to a variety of reasons. When your finances in your city are growing, as your city's growing, sometimes we don't have all the resources that we'd like to have. And so those council members at that time had to make the hard decisions to prioritize things one over another. So we do have a lot of good data to work off of. I'm not going to bore you and read through all those because I'd be here till tomorrow and you all would be asleep within half an hour. So we're going to move into some of the other data as it relates to the water system assets. As I mentioned, the system was likely originally built in the 1940s and 50s, a good portion of it. We have 17.5 miles of supply and distribution line just for the water system itself. We have about 660 current connections. And our current water source comes from the Walnut Creek Special Utility District. We buy about 90%, 95% of our water from them. The rest of it comes from the 3 city wells that are functioning. And then we have the 4th that is in rehab at the moment. So we will bring that one hopefully back online by the end of this calendar year. Some of the needs of that water system. We've talked to council when we had a February 10th meeting. We spent a good portion of a Saturday with them and we talked about either re-drilling wells at our current sites or at new well sites, and we gave them the cost of about $750,000 per well. Now we've had some questions as to where those numbers come from. Staff worked very closely with Upper Trinity Groundwater Conservation District to gain those numbers. They deal with a lot of cities in Wise County. They also partner with some of their other conservation districts to arrive at that number. So that's why when the proposition says it could drill 2 to 3 wells, we're hopeful for 3, but it will depend on the cost. And I don't know what those are until we actually have approval to pursue the project and to obtain the bids. So we will see what that might look like in the future. You will see at the bottom, these are some of the other items that exist within that system. So we need to rehab those ground storage water tanks, the ones that you may have seen that have the rust in them or the holes in the top. We have the Bobo pump station, which needs to have some attention, as well as the FM 3433 pump station. And believe it or not, that elevated tank is no longer new. It looks pretty new from the outside, and most of us probably remember when that went up, but it is past due for its own rehabilitation on that tank. And given that that is our only elevated tank, it's more difficult to rehab because we don't have a second one to push the water to and take that one offline. So we have an estimate of about $25,000 to fix some of the issues with it, for a total of about $550,000 in added costs within our water system that need to be addressed. Those $550,000 are not in our bond package. we will need to look at this through a variety of other mechanisms, and I will bring that forward to council at another time. So then moving into the wastewater system, you will see on the slide deck behind me, the picture on the left is the west plant, the picture on the right is the east plant, and you will notice some striking differences between the two. The east plant is, actually you can see some of the divided pieces within it, and you can see some of the equalization basins and the clarifier and some of the other parts to it behind. This plant is pretty much up to date. It has a lot of component pieces that make it more sanitary for the staff, and we'll talk about that as we go along. It makes it operate much more efficiently than what we have now, which uses less water, less electricity, etc., and it is able to be expanded. The west plant on the left, which you see there, is not. So for our sewer system, we have about 9.5 miles of gravity flow piping. We have 150 manholes, 2 main lift stations, and 1 collection lift station. So all of those components have moving parts and electrical pieces that break down over time and need to be rehabbed. The east plant was originally built in 1991 and is poised to handle about 100,000 gallons a day, just in layman's terms. Like I said, it's in pretty good condition, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that slide. But this, Jesus, would you like to talk to what these pieces are within that east plant for me, sir?
Yes. So there on the left photo, the blue is the blower that helps keep the bugs, bacteria alive. Inside these square pieces on the right is a digester winger. No, the square piece right there. Yeah, it's divided down the middle. The left side is always active. The right side is your excess. When you got to get rid of old sludge to stay within parameters of the state, we have to follow rules and everything under the state and EPA. And then the far right's clarifier. Everything goes in there. It settles. Your clear comes out. It goes into a chlorine contact chamber disinfection. Once it gets disinfected, it goes out into the river as the permit allows, the state allows. And as long as we're meeting our state requirements, that's how the system works. The leftover sludge on the square part, we take to landfills. You smell it sometimes around these areas when the farmers are spreading. Yeah, it's manure. I mean, yeah, that's what it is. And a lot of these farms do use it. And as long as the process is right, that's how, in a quick short term, that's how wastewater works. There's a lot of more moving parts, but it would take me hours to explain everything.
And I've learned a lot about the wastewater system since I've been here in Rome. It's a fascinating component of public services, and there's a lot of chemistry that goes into it that you may not be aware of, but our public works team does an amazing job with what they've been given, and my hat is off to them every day. I have a total newfound respect for everything that they do.
Thank you.
Any questions on the east plant? This is part of our overall system. Okay. So moving forward into the west plant, this was originally built in 1998 as a result of some concerns that were ongoing at the east plant at that time and the capacity that the east plant could handle. This one actually handles 150,000 gallons a day, or can. Often we exceed that, and we'll talk about that as we go through this process. As I mentioned earlier, most of our issues with the west plant, or the most concentrated history that we can find, started to occur in 2015. And I've put together a spreadsheet of all the NCNs, or non-conforming notice, that the staff has to send to TCEQ to talk about the issues with that plant when we've had overflow. And Mr. Dominguez has a very interesting statistic that we'll get to as we go through that we found. But this plant in and of itself was a little bit larger than the east when it was originally constructed, but it is well past its life cycle. Would you flip to the next one for me, please? So this photo is the outside of the holding tank for that sewer treatment plant. And if you will look over your right shoulder here, you can see an aerial view of what the inside of that tank looks like. On one side of this is the digester. One side of it's the clarifier. Why don't you step in before I make a mess of that?
So the outside part one part is a digester, and split down the middle. The brown stuff is the aeration basin. The center circle in the middle, that is the clarifier, the clear part. That's the part that settles down all the sludge, and we make sure we're, you know, putting out clean water for the environment. So that is supposed to be a very light tint, no trash in there or any type of debris. At that plant, if you look at that picture with the trash can over there to the far right, our pumps push our sewer out of the lift station into the plant. And that right there is unacceptable to the state. I mean, that you get in trouble for that. That is not good. And we rake it out every day. That there's rags, there's other contents in there, and that's the bar screen. Yeah. It's I would say the bar screen needs to be brought with new technology, things that remove everything.
Okay, so when staff go to the plants and what you can't see down in here is you can see it on the picture back over here on the board. Do you see the right with the bars? That's what they call a bar screen. They have literally a rake hoe that they rake this up with, and they let it dry out here for a little bit of time. And then what they're required to do is put it in this trash can. And then they have to take this trash can over to a roll-off dumpster, and they have to hand dump it in. Well, and in 1998, this was probably good technology. The East plant does all of this, so staff's not required to fish these things out that most of us don't want to fish out. Well, and it's just unsanitary to a great extent, and it causes some of these other things that you see, the floating parts here in the center part, you'll see the long trough over here on this picture that's by the map. That's also things that have escaped the bar screen that end up in the plant that cause the plant to have issues as it goes along. So we just want to give an accurate picture of what we mean when we say it's outdated technology. The East plant screens all of this and bags it, and all they have to do is move the bag. They don't have to do all the rest of that part, if that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.
Jesse, is you and your team, are you still using a pool skimmer, like a regular pool skimmer? And what kind of, is it like a shovel that you're using? Since we just saw a trash can that is like a metal trash can that a city should not be using to dump waste that looks like human waste, baby wipes and everything else, that is going to be our drinking water. So please tell me what you're using to skim, because I know once it was a pool skimmer from Walmart. So please describe that.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is at the very end of our plant, the disinfection phase, some of these items do get through. Why? Because they float. We do have to use a pool skimmer to go in there and clean all that stuff off, grease, rags, whatever contents go through, and that has to be done daily. It cannot pass, well, it should not pass, as it is an environmental impact again. And you're right, at some point this water does filter down to a river, and what does water do? It drains down to your aquifers. So we want to put out the best effluent treated water into our systems, or out into our environment. And this does have a huge impact. And we do use a shovel to scoop that top stuff into the trash can. And then, like Amanda said, we do pick it up, carry it over to the dumpster, and it's not a fun process.
So with the bond, would this help you get also the equipment, the uniforms that you need as well? So if you can please just let us know it, if not Amanda, to help you and your team to do a better job.
Yes, so the technology would be there. There'd be an automated bar screen, so a machine that does it, and it would be prior to the whole sewer system, prior to the wastewater treatment plant. So that would take out all the rags and other particles in there. These items cause the pumps to clog up at times or whatever. There's clogs because of this items. But yes, the technology would be there. We definitely need a press. We're growing big enough to where we can't rely on what are the drying beds of the picture right behind you, Chief. Yeah, those things right there, those are supposed to be empty. We let them air dry, and once they dry, we scoop them up with the backhoe. We get in there and shovel it. I personally do it all the time. Well, when it's dry, we get in there, we scoop it up, and it goes into the dumpster. Once a dumpster gets in, it has to pass a liquid-free test. So we grab a scoop out of there through a paint filter. If liquid comes out, the landfill will not pick it up because they can't accept it. So it has to be dry. Those have been wet from before December, and to this day, they're not dry. Why? Because it rains. We're in the rainy season, and my digester, which is the picture right there at the bottom with that valve right there, Chief, where you're at, that one. That's supposed to be empty, but we don't have the technology. We can't keep up. So I'm having to call a company called MagnaFlow, take our waste to another sewer plant in Fort Worth or wherever they take it because we don't have the capacity. Yes, we have used them before, correct?
It is costly.
It is very
much so.
costly.
Mhm. One truck that takes off 8,000 gallons is $1,875 for one load. And we,
Plus fuel charges.
yes, and we calculated that to drain the plant after an overflow, it could be anywhere from $25,000 to $40,000 in trucks.
Per overflow per day.
So it can get very expensive very quickly. And one of the things that we recently had a surprise inspection from TCEQ this Monday. Mr. Dominguez was actually on the phone with me and had to hang up because TCEQ had showed up at the West plant. And went over there, and one of the things that they have informed us is that when we have an overflow, and Chief, can you find the one, maybe the drying beds there. So when you look here, when we have an overflow of any magnitude at this point, or we get close to, we're going to be required to hire those trucks to come take off some of the excess water. We are currently being required because what you see behind those drying beds, and if you will look here at this one on the top that you see the drying beds, right behind it you see the stand of trees and the fence. There's a small berm behind that when we have the overflow from the round parts of the system, the water goes and the sewage goes out on the ground. And if it goes beyond the berm, it basically gets into a creek called Oates Creek, and then that ends up in the Trinity River, which is why we are in some of the condition that we're in now, because we are affecting the environment further down the line. So when we have an overflow, we will spill 150 to 250,000 gallons, and that's a slow day. That's not a big spill for us to a great extent. So we are now going to be required to hire those trucks. We are also now required to remediate any sludge that is escaped into the creek for as far as it floats down the creek. And that is at our expense.
So you talk about the price of the trucks and the frequency that we're now going to be an increased frequency of having to use the trucks because of the DCEQ inspection. If the bond passes and we upgrade this, then it sounds like it's almost, it pays for itself because we don't have to hire the trucks anymore. And so we don't have that expense. And then you have the expense of building the new one. So the $11 million bond may end up costing us nothing because now we don't have to pay for the trucks.
Well, that may be a wash. And that's
what I'm saying.
Yeah, we've not received those very large bills yet. But based on that surprise inspection that we had on Monday and the documentation that we received, this is the second offense within so many months. And so it escalates the issue for the non-conformance. And so Mr. Dominguez has reached out to our TCEQ inspector, and he has gained those documents so that we can be very clear with the community. This is just the situation that we face. As Rome has grown, as any small city grows, sometimes they have to defer maintenance on projects because they may not have the cash at that time. But at some point, we are going to have to invest in ourselves. And Rome is there. Because not only do we have needs as it relates to water and sewer, but we're going to have other needs as this community continues to expand and mature and is going to expect a certain level of service delivery. We've made some good strides recently with some police cars and some trucks for public works and a backhoe, but we still have a ways to go, and we need to measure out how quickly or how we pay for that over time, because no city is going to have that kind of cash on hand, nor can they ever save up enough to pay cash. Even the big cities don't have that. That may be more information than you wanted, but having been a city manager for many, many years, this is my professional opinion. And that's about all, and that's what you hired me for. So that's my concern, is that if TCEQ comes in, as they have said they now are, and we're required to hire those trucks every time we have a rain event that overflows the plant, it's going to get very expensive very quickly, and we don't have the cash on hand to pay for that.
I'm not a resident here, but question that a resident might have, you're talking about overflow. Is it just overflow from rain, or is it from watering yards, or flushing commodes, taking showers, washing
Yes.
laundry?
Yes.
So it's not just rain events that cause the
Well,
overflow, it's
the
usage
plants-
as well.
That's a good question. The plant's currently at 150,000 gallons. Jesus, do you want to take this one?
So I'll put it this way. So the plant runs, say, every day 60 to 70,000 gallons a day. During rain events, this is where we have the biggest impact, near every time. It's not almost. You look at the numbers, we go from 70,000 gallons a day to hundreds of thousands. I've seen 200, 250,000. I have a report right here from TCEQ. It says from December 24th, 2014 to June 18th, 2015, an approximate of 1.8 million gallons of wastewater or sludge were discharged, meaning that water spilled onto the ground and outside the sewer plant. That's a lot. That's a huge impact to the environment. And TCEQ, the more we keep doing this and as frequent as it gets, they're going to come in stricter every time, and they're going to be there to witness to make sure we're doing the right thing on our end. And pumping hauls with the semis is going to get pricey. The dates are going to be December 24th, 2014, June 18th, 2015. And says 1,835,850 gallons. That's what that was unauthorized discharge.
Okay, so moving to the next slide, please, Shayna. This is one that you've seen around here. This is a lot of what the plant looks like on any given day. You can see that we are very close to the top.
That's after a rain event.
After a rain event.
Yeah.
And this is when we start to overflow and have the issues. Next slide, please. This is an aerial of those drying beds that you can see, and Jesus has talked about the concerns and the challenges that we have. Summer is not as bad, but winter is awful because we don't get enough heat and we don't get enough sun and we can't get them dried. When you look from the West Wastewater Treatment Plant as it relates to the filters and some of the other parts associated with this, on the very far right, this is the one where Jesus was talking about that they have to use the pool skimmer to get the things out that get past the filter and the other items associated with the plant.
That filter's offline. It has been for years due to simple terms. From looking at talking to plenty of previous operators and even an engineer, that filter was designed for surface water, not for wastewater. And how it got there, that's above me. But
That's a 1998
yeah,
question.
that's a question. But anytime we did try to turn this filter on, so what it does is there's sand, rocks, filter system. Your sewer goes on top, it settles down, all your clean water goes out through the bottom, and your dirty stuff gets pushed to the far left, and then it pumps back into the plant. We have attempted to fix these, and they have spent a good amount of money in the past on them. And as soon as it pumps into the plant has other issues of a good way to put it is sizing. So it hits the plant and it shocks the plant, making the plant turn all brown from one end all the way to the other, which is does not meet the state requirements.
When I said there's a lot of chemistry involved, they have to test routinely and send those tests off to get that information back to make sure that all the biologicals are in balance for the plant to do what it's supposed to do. And it's a lot more complex than I ever knew. So next slide, please, ma'am. Jesus, would you like to speak to what we've got here?
Yes, on the left, those are the blowers, just like the other plant is the blue ones. They create air for the plant for the bugs to survive. And then on the far right, that is your lift station. Down at the very bottom, you have two pumps. One kicks on and when the level gets so high, and then it'll kick down, and then the other pump will kick on. We have had to pull these pumps quite often because of all the debris and rags and whatever else goes in there. I want to say I have a picture, but yeah. What it does is the bar screen or the thing that filters out the debris would go prior to this, and that would prevent your pumps from clogging up, from creating stress on them, because once those rags get caught up on it, it makes it push, it works harder. So, and you do have some leakage, you'd say, when rain comes in, it does leak around the seals all in the lift station. So it does need some rehabilitation.
Take my word for it. If you ever at that plant and he offers to show you that lift station, decline. It's not pretty. Yes.
Okay, if the bond passes for the West Side wastewater plant, how long is it going to take for it to be up and running, the new one?
Well,
Within 12 months
yeah.
is the projected timeline from some of the people that we've talked to and our engineer. These plants are what they call package plants. So oddly enough, they come in a box, for lack of a better term, and they put them together on site. So it's not, it's a bolt together type system, and it's one that's very prevalent with developers, etc. Matter of fact, RVR put in one very much like what we're looking at, and they just bring it in on trucks and they set it down and they bolt everything together. So within 12 months is the goal.
I wanted to know if the bond doesn't pass and we do not make the improvements that are required. I've heard and been told that if the state comes in and takes it over, then those people that are being serviced by that would be the ones paying for it instead of the whole of the city. Is that correct?
I don't have any information to that end, but I know that the state, if they have to come in, it's going to be after a lot of fines have been assessed against us before they're going to even want to intervene, from what we've been told, and it's going to cost considerably more than just what we have in front of us today. Utility fund, and one of the things that we probably should explain is your water and sewer system operates out of what's called an enterprise fund, or we affectionately call it the utility fund. Through that, it is supposed to be a self-supporting fund through fees charged to users. Right now, your utility fund is running very close to the red. And we've got to deal with that as we go along because we've not kept pace with inflation or cost increases or needs of that department. So we have some other issues to deal with in the utility fund, but the reason we're bringing it forward as an INS supported debt is to allow it to be paid over a longer period of time, over a broader base as the community grows, so that those who move into Rome over the years are helping to pay for this project, and it's not simply being paid for by the 1,900 of you who live here today. That's just not sustainable for any community, and it's frankly not fair. If you think about if you're going to go buy your home and you can pay cash and are fortunate, that's a wonderful thing. But if you're going to pay it out over the years so that as your family grows, you can use more of it, and as you may or may not take on, you may take on someone to rent a room in your home. They're helping you to pay for that. It's not just the folks who are currently sitting here in Rome. That's just not, it's called generational equity, and it's not an appropriate use of city funds, in my opinion. I had a couple other questions.
I don't know if this is a good time to bring this up. You want to talk about capacity right now, the new wastewater treatment plant, or do you want to talk about that later?
Can we hold that one for just a second?
Yeah.
Answer some of these other questions. I believe okay.
The people that live out in Bywell have septic systems.
Mhm.
Is there any incentive for them to vote for this?
That's a great question. So it's an investment in Rome generally, and the folks in Bywell may not forever be on a septic system. Now they may divert to the east plant at some point, but the bond that was approved in 19 for the east plant is being paid for by the entirety of the community. It's not simply being charged against those who use the east plant. So this is what you call a public service. A public service is for the general good and cannot be divisible and provided by a private company for less or in a more equitable fashion. So I can see why that would be of concern to them, and they'll have to make that decision. But there may come a time when Bywell's not on septic systems, or their septics may fail. Matter of fact, we just looked at one behind what's going to be the new Ace Hardware, and that septic has had the lids, they've collapsed in on them because they haven't been maintained. And there are frogs hopping in and out of the septic. So that's going to have to be rebuilt before Ace Hardware starts. And so you have to look at these projects as an investment in the entirety of the city of Rome. There may be things that come up over the years that are going to benefit one group more than another, but is it going to benefit our community as we build community? And that's the important question to ask.
Along that line, right now everybody knows we can't get any business to move in here other than Ace Hardware, which is on its own septic, because we can't support them with infrastructure. We get this done and we get the infrastructure in place, would it not follow that more business will want to come here?
Great question.
And then that will offset a lot of this cost through their tax revenue?
Yes. So in basic terms, yes, but sales and use tax is one way that you can pay debt. Property tax is another way that you can pay debt down. I will tell you that in my time of almost 18 months here in Rome, I meet with developers or talk to them every single week. And I promise you that 114 corridor going out to Boyd is a hot area that people would like to be in, but I don't have any capacity at the West plant from which to bring them online. So I currently have folks on both the northish, southish side of that road, on the left and the right, going into Boyd, that want to bring in retail and other restaurants and shopping opportunities for this area, that at current they're just waiting to see what the community does, because we can't provide another hookup to that West plant.
So coming back around to Mr. Easton's question, so is it not fair to say that the residents of Bywell, as well as everyone else, will benefit from the ability to bring different businesses on board? Because at this time you're having to say no, the wastewater and water system can't support.
So let me come at that from a different angle. When you look at municipal finances, You want to have a good balance between your ad valorem property tax and your sales and use tax. Right now, our sales and use tax base is small because we don't have a grocery store. We don't have a lot of retail. We have a couple of gas stations that certainly contribute. We have some other areas that contribute. We're not doing bad with sales and use tax, but we're not doing what we could be. We are literally at the nexus of two highways. We ought to have plenty of things for people to eat at, shop at, be a part of, experience, entertainment. We ought to have those, but we don't, because we don't have the capacity from which to provide those public services for those businesses to come in. So yes, they will benefit because you will have that variety of shopping. You may not have to go to Decatur or down to Hazlet to get groceries. We might get a grocery store ourselves, which is literally on the top of my list to obtain. But we'll have to see what that looks like. But I don't think I can be clear enough to say that the developers want to be here. And I'm talking to them all the time about what can come in and where can they put it and can they hook up to the West Plant. Because right now that 114 corridor is very hot. And if we don't have the infrastructure from which to provide those public services to those businesses and provide some diversity to our tax base, the entire burden is borne by the residents. You want that diversity in sales and use. You really want sales and use to be about 60% of your income and 40% in ad valorem. We're not there at the moment because we don't have that diversity in the tax base. That's my job to keep an eye on. Yes, sir.
I'm just trying to summarize a little bit. So earlier we talked about the cost of the trucks coming and, having to come in and that not having to pay for those anymore. And that could potentially be a wash for what our taxes go up to pay for the $11 million Proposition B. But then we would also have additional businesses coming in because
Yes.
they want to come in so we can support them. So passing this $11 million bond is actually a revenue generating.
In the long run, yes, it will be, because your tax base is going to grow, both in residential and commercial, and that's what your city lives on.
So we pass this and we end up making money.
Well, now I can't tell you I'm going to be able to write you a check for $11.5 million. I can say to you that we will expand that tax base, and that will drive additional revenue for the city of Rome. I don't have the numbers run because I don't have a current land use plan that I can predict what that's going to come off of. But we've really made some great strides in our budgeting to figure out where we're at now and what do we have in reserves and where are we going to be in 5 years. That's the next iteration of our budget, is getting a 5-year financial forecast so we know what potentially we can make. Most people who've been around in this area for any length of time, if you drive through Rome and you drive through Boyd, what's the difference? Yeah. So is their tax base. Boyd has made investments in their community that have allowed them to be more successful than we are today in attracting businesses. Correct. Oh, Mrs. Mize was first, Chief. Sorry. She's very quiet up here, so we don't want to forget her.
Okay, the question that I had is, say the bond doesn't pass, and you're looking for businesses to come in to our city, and we have a new school or new high school that's supposed to be coming in 10 years. Why aren't we partnering up with these businesses, school districts to help relieve the needs of our city?
That's a great question. And I will tell you that I sat down with Mr. Pinkoffs just south of the highway and I asked him to build us a new West Plant. He declined. But I did ask him for $8 million because at that point in time, that was the cost to build a new one. Because he did not want to put in that plant and do lift stations completely in his, so he thought he could partner with us, but the price tag was way higher than anything he ever expected. So based on that, every interaction I have with the developer, I'm asking them to contribute something to the city in some form or fashion. As long as I'm sitting in this chair, Rome will not be on the short end of the stick on development agreements anymore. We have negotiated some in the past that could have been more in our favor, and we didn't know what we could ask for. So we're pushing back on some things now, and we are looking for ways that they can be of support to Rome, because in my opinion, that growth has to pay for its growth. The community is not responsible for paying for that developer's growth. So based on that, NISD has partnered with us in the past. They helped with the elevated tank, and they had offsetting water bills for a while. And if it came down to it in 10 years, if they wanted to build that high school, we'd probably have to tell them no, because we don't have capacity at the West plant. But if we let this go another 10 years, the TCQ will be in here before that. So, well, I'm not asking the school on that piece now, because we have some partnerships with them. They also pay impact fees whenever they build a new school or new businesses come in. And those are designed to offset some of those costs. So we do have some built-in safety nets for us already in our fee structure. So we have looked at that. But the big ticket builders are the ones that you're going to get to partner with you. The smaller ones do not have that capacity in. They can help, yes, and they still pay their own impact fees. They're just not as large as some of the bigger projects. Yes, sir.
This, if we get a new treatment plant, is it extendable?
Yes, absolutely would be.
And how would the 11 million go with that there, or would we have to go into another bond to
So
extend it?
that's a good question. So in my opinion, once we get the West plant where it needs to be, say, Lord, we get a grocery store. That grocery store is going to pay to expand that plant, because they are the ones bringing that impact to Rome. We're not driving it. If we have some kind of housing development that comes in, for instance, I've talked to the developers of Prairie Point. They want to bring in 1,200 single-family residential homes in that development. I've been able to hopefully negotiate a cap on multifamily of 400, because currently that improvement district does not have a cap, so they could put as many apartments over there as they want. And so I've been able to partner with that developer to get an agreement to cap it. But if they bring in and start their phasing, phase 1 and phase 2, they have to upgrade the East plant. I would have that same expectation for anybody that's going to hit that West plant.
To your response about PMB and Rolling B, that is supposed to be commercial down the pipe fence. And recently, speaking to them myself, he was saying that he wants to build a grocery store and restaurants
I've heard that.
down 287.
Yep.
But knowing if we do not have water first, we cannot give them water.
Correct.
So we do need,
Absolutely.
it's what, I mean, we would need this for the residents then to, in return, to get our dream grocery store. So knowing that New Fairview, listening to them and what they're recently saying, that they have more land than what Decatur has, then they don't get the tax dollars first. Or Boyd, we don't want them. And that's why I say frequently at the city council meetings, we need, if they're passing through our roads, please, use your tax, everyone
Absolutely.
needs to use their tax dollars here.
Absolutely. Because it benefits
No one
the
else
city.
is. Yes, it benefits the city.
All the way
and
around.
don't let them benefit their other cities. Thank you.
Couple questions in the back.
Comment. We're trying to find ways to get free money or get somebody else to pay for all this. My statement is this: why should they invest in Rome if we're not willing to invest in ourselves?
Amanda, do we have a rough guesstimate on how much we spend on repairs for this outdated plant?
Our repair budget for anything in Public Works is anemic at best. And I believe we have already exceeded that for this year for emergency repairs. So we'll be bringing a budget adjustment back to council. I don't have, and I did not prepare a number for that for this discussion, so I can't answer your question. But I do know that, for instance, take the fire department. They have $1,000 repair budget for their building for a year. They've already exceeded that. So we've got to do better at planning our budgets and being more realistic in what it actually takes to run the city, because I think we've had a false number in our head for a while. And we have to realize that we are on the cusp of the Metroplex. And unless we buy up all the property in Rome in our ETJ, it's coming. And there's not a lot I can do other than manage what's coming. I can't tell them no.
So second question, are we also providing like physicals and checkups for our public works that have to deal with this bacteria?
No.
So along the lines of the ETJ, can you explain to the people that have questions about the ETJ and how we won't grow?
So Rome actually has, according to our comprehensive planning document, 19 square miles that can be encompassed in the ETJ. And Mr. Loftus has done some research and some calculations that by the year 2080, this community could be as large as 35,000 people. By the year 2040, if we are not a home rule city with more than 5,000 residents, it will surprise me. Because just take, for instance, if Prairie Point kicks off, that's 1,200 single family residential and 400 apartment units right there. We're at over 5,000. And those developers are ready now. They are attempting to help us partner with a secondary water source that we could potentially identify, because every community in southern, well, pretty much every community in Wise County is struggling to find water. And the council was very wise and dedicated time, effort, and energy to enter into a partnership with a lot of our southern cities to form and create a water district so that we could use bulk buying power to potentially negotiate for water and wastewater for all of our communities, which will help lower the cost. That's a 40 or 50 year investment. I need something in the next 5 years for Rome. So we're still looking down that path to make sure that we are identifying every source that we can for water, and we're being as conservative as we can in its use so that we don't water the pavement or put in St. Augustine grass that takes a whole lot of water to keep alive. Things like that, so that we are being a responsible community until we get that secondary source. We're trying to keep every door open for Rome as much as possible. So that ETJ at 19 square miles, if you'll just look at the map over Chief's shoulder, just looking at the orange above his head, that's Chisholm Trail Ranch, and that's in the city limits. If that family ever determines to sell that ranch off, that's going to more than, that'll expand the size of this city at least twice. Just that. I have folks coming to me all the time as it relates to other pockets here, there, and around on behalf of the community that they know if they do not annex into the city limits, they do not get city services. They don't get water, they don't get sewer for the most part, and they don't get police protection. And being in southern Wise County with the sheriff's office and the fact that it is stretched so thin over 900 plus square miles, 900, people want city protection and city services along those lines. You will continue to see a demand on your fire and EMS services because folks are moving in and they need ambulances and they need fire prevention, and we're going to see that service delivery area grow. So we have to be getting in front of the discussion and preparing for any of that versus lagging behind it. You know, think of any city that you see, think just down 287 with all the homes that they've built and all of the businesses that they've put in, and what's the last thing they did? Fix the roads. We don't want to be in that position if we can avoid it, metaphorically speaking. We want to be thinking ahead, and we want to be positioning Rome so that we can be successful, so that in 5 years our finances are top notch and we have some resources and we have some capacity and we have some reserve funds and we have well planned for the future. But the things that are on the agenda for today are infrastructure only related, unlike the recent bonds for the facilities that didn't fare very well at the polls. We need to prioritize where we're investing first, and infrastructure is critical. So I understand we're getting close to some time, so let me get through some of these just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. You'll go ahead too for me, Shana. So this is your utility fund. Do you remember I talked to you about, Chief, do you have the microphone? About how the utility fund, I did some analysis on it to determine where we're at and why we don't have any capacity in the utility fund from which to service these bonds. So if you look going back 10 years, you see that we were in the red a couple of years and we were barely in the black a few years. This was when the sewer rates were raised. For nigh on, what was it, Shana, 25 years, we didn't change the sewer rate. And that causes a major malfunction in whether or not this is a healthy fund. You'll go to the next slide, please, ma'am. This is looking at that fund with depreciation of your assets. We have not kept up with any reinvestment in our assets for the last 10 years. The fund has run in the red. Matter of fact, I found some information as it relates to a audit that we had back in 2004, 2005, where the auditor for the city raised the alarm that this was about to become an insolvent function of the city of Rome because we were always running in the red. Rates weren't what they should be. Base rates weren't what they should be. So these are things that put us in the position that we're in today. If you go to the next one, ma'am. Then looking at the fund performance just in general, you can see that we had as many red as we had black, and you can see the sewer rate increases there. This was FY23. We're still working on the audit for that, and this is the current fiscal year. We show being above the line by $437. This is why this fund is not very healthy. Go ahead, ma'am. So looking at your sewer rates, in 1996 they were set at $11, and they stayed here till 2020. This should have been reviewed every year to 2 years, and they should have been adjusted slightly every year to 2 years so that you don't have this major fall off the cliff. Oh my gosh, you've raised the rates and now my water and sewer bill is off the chart. Because we did not reinvest in ourselves and the system, we lost all of this money that could have been used to upgrade and repair and modernize the systems that we have now. That's an exponential loss that we'll never recover. So go to the next one, please. This is the same thing as it relates to commercial. They were at 11 in 96, then council moved them to 15. They stayed there till 2019. And then we had to raise the rate significantly, which is when the commercial businesses got so upset because their water bills went up so high. But had we been looking at our rates and doing those studies over the years like we should have, and raising that rate incrementally, that wouldn't have been such an issue, and you wouldn't have lost all this capacity. Does that make sense? So best practice for anything in this particular area is to be doing a rate study every year, at most every 2 years, and changing the rates minimum every 2 years. So this explains some of the reasons why we find ourselves in the position that we're in today. This is not unusual for a small town. Let me be very clear. You will find this in a lot of communities more times than you think because we were small. We were facing a variety of different things. Tax rates were doing different things. Home valuations were doing different things. So those decisions were made at that time for whatever reasons they were made. But this is where we are today. And by opening up the floor to answer whatever questions you have, I hope we're giving you an insight into what we're dealing with in that utility fund and in your infrastructure, because our whole goal is to make this growable and safe and sustainable and not violating the environment. So TCEQ is not surprising us when we turn up for work on a Monday. That's kind of the goal that we're looking for. So we're happy to answer any other questions you have, but that's kind of the bulk of the presentation. You all have the FAQs that have been approved by our bond council for each of the 3 propositions. For my council members that are here this evening, you also have copies of this in your email inbox. I will also be putting this on the website, but I wanted to present to you all this evening first before we put it all out there. And we will have another one of these town hall meetings 2 weeks from tonight at the same location and at the same time. Any other questions that we can answer for you?
This one's for you, Jesus. Could you kind of educate us? Would reverse osmosis help catch some of that water since we're in such a water shortage? Would that be beneficial for the city?
Yeah, I don't think we put out enough water to do that through the wastewater plants. And on top of that, there's regulations on the state. So I don't know too much detail on it, but I don't think we have a big enough system on that part.
I'll explain reverse osmosis to you. Usually your bigger cities like your Fort Worth and your Dallases, they use reverse osmosis because they put out a lot of MGD a day. And you got to have a lot, like 40 MGD a day. That's a lot of water. So therefore, it's not cost efficient for a small entity like us, a small PWS, to have reverse osmosis. Probably what will happen when we get our wells is we'll just do chloramine disinfection to match what Walnut Creek is doing at this time.
Can you go over the report that TCEQ gave us, or?
Yeah, I can do that. So they gave us an active violation, failure to prevent the unauthorized discharge of wastewater, which could cause harm to the environment. Specifically on March 17, 2024, the AB overflowed because of major I&I issues in the collection system. The second active violation is going to be failure to adequately abate and contain the overflow at the wastewater treatment plant during accidental overflows that happen during heavy rain events to prevent unauthorized discharges. Some sludge accumulation noted at the creek where discharge entered. And then she gave an annotation on the drying beds. She says sludge drying beds are not able to be used because they're too wet to send to the landfill. Facility is pumping and hauling from sludge digester. So all in all, it's just a repeat violation. She put it on here somewhere. Where'd she put it? Maybe as an, but all it is a repeat violation of what we all always have done. But they came at us in a different manner on how we facilitate the spills and how we react to them, and we got to show improvements of how we're cleaning up and required to clean up during and until the spill stops. If it's a week long or a day long, it doesn't matter, that we have to do everything of pumping and hauling everything because we are having environmental impact.
And one of the things that, just to add to what Jesus is saying, when you go back and you look at the NCNs or the non-conformance notices to TCEQ and you look at the reason, it mostly says rain-related event. And then when it talks about what the city is going to do, it says city is going to be repairing old clay tile lines and replacing the west plant on a lot of documents from 2015. We haven't done anything on it. And so that causes the issue to escalate and causes them to become more interested in what we're doing.
Jesse, I'm thinking that that's the water that goes through the manholes and gets into the pipes.
Correct. I&I
Okay.
is
Now, at one point when Lance Petty was here, I believe you were here too. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
If it was round 1 or round 2 when you were here. But they had started replacing those manhole covers because they said that in one of the it might have been the Jacob and Martin plan in 2016, that would impact what goes into the sewage from the stormwater runoff.
You are correct. They did start putting rain covers in, but the rest of the manhole, it seeps through
Yeah,
it.
where are we at that with even getting it? I thought the manhole covers were being replaced.
No,
It's just a little
150 of
plastic
them.
little cap. All it is it stops the water. Say it's in the middle of the street
Yeah.
All it does is it has a little seal and it puddles almost like a bucket. But the rest of your manholes still getting breached. Some brick manholes,
Nothing we can do about that to, you know.
we can epoxy them, but there have been manholes on. Next time it rains, I'll snap a picture.
Yeah.
They have been epoxied and fixed. They're leaking now. That was done prior to me, but
Yeah.
that is not the most efficient way to.
Well, I'm just thinking of avoiding the rainwater runoff that goes into the.
Right, you still got to think about the clay tile lines, though. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I, just for my clarity of trying to keep up with all of this is my first meeting.
Sure.
here. I've been in Rome for quite a while. But, so when we build that new treatment plant, we're building 10,000 homes. Is the capacity, or are we going to have to do it again?
That's a great question. So those 10,000 homes are actually in our ETJ and won't be coming in the city limits for probably 20 years or better. So until that time, that developer has to take care of their water and their wastewater, and the city is not responsible for it. They wanted to use part of the area in Blue Stem that backs up to one of our neighborhoods. They wanted to use that to tie into our West plant, which is why he thought maybe he could partner with us, which is why I asked him for $8 million. And I wanted him to replace the whole plant because, hey, swing for the fence. If we can get it, great. He was able to go a different direction for less money, and he just put in lift stations to take his effluent or his waste and run it into the plant he has on the other side of FM 3433 because it was less expensive for him to do that. So those homes won't impact us. They will not pay city taxes. They do not pay for city water. The sales and use tax that will come on some of that commercial is going to be shared back with the district. That was all negotiated way back in the 90s. And there's not a lot that I can do to change that trajectory at this point. But once they start building some commercial, we will get at least a portion of sales and use tax off of that can go into the city's coffers. But they also pay for a police officer and a vehicle to go with that. They pay for a full firefighter and all of the ancillary training and needs for that person. And as their needs continue to grow, I will be asking them to pay for additional public safety employees.
I just received a text from somebody that wanted to know if people that are listening online can call in or ask questions online.
They can send the email to me and I'll happy to try and bring it to the next meeting. But
Okay, thank
to
you.
do that, it's going to take away from the conversation we have here. It is being recorded, yes. Christy?
I have two questions that somebody had asked me today. Well, one of them though, this one is me. You're talking about the sludge in the drying beds can't be taken because they're not dry. On the new system, is there a way to get like heated dry beds?
We won't
to
have dry
help?
beds on the new system.
There won't.
So we'll
They won't
refer
need
to
them.
the old drying beds, but you'll want to keep those active for backup and emergencies. But there's a machine called a screw press. It grabs the sludge, as you'd say, and you put a chemical in called a polymer, and it bonds together and it squeezes the water out of the sludge, and it throws the water back into the sewer plant, and it creates the sludge that's supposed to dry in there within minutes. So yes, that's what we use at these.
You had another question?
The second one, that this person in City Hall came to City Hall and they have heard through the vines about state taking over, and that scares them to death. Can you did say that would be down the road after we're assessed fines if it doesn't get fixed. So can you just lightly touch on state taking
So
over?
that's what we've been told, that the state is not interested in coming in and fixing the issue for us. And if they do, it will be after we've received fines because we are still in non-compliance, and they're still going to push us to fix it first because it is our system, it is our city.
And from my understanding, it would be pushed more onto the EPA versus the state coming
And you
in.
do not want the
Yeah.
federal government involved in this issue.
Okay. First question. Doing my research and looking at a large city, in the clay pipes, is there lead in them? And then the second question, if you answer, when was the previous citation that TCEQ came out? But the main question is, do we have lead in our clay pipes?
So I think lead is more concentrated on the water side, the drinking water. Yeah, that's in the water. We don't have lead in the clay pipes that I know of. And yeah, no. And then what was the other one? The
Wasn't it
previous
about 5 months
citation.
ago? That may have been in the email you sent me earlier today.
The one I have with paperwork right now is this one from. Let me see when it refers to real quick.
Yeah, we talked to the inspector about the fact that if you go to the TCEQ's website and you look for the non-compliance violations, it does not really show the city of Rome. But I did go back and print their annual reports for 2020, 15, and 10, and I highlighted the different areas where they had assessed us fines. So we do have that information. Some of those fines were abated. They were forgiven because we did something to help the environment. But I did see one fine was as high as like $56,000. One was $8,500, and we were able to abate that with an environmental project that was of benefit. And so we didn't have to pay the fine and the project. They used the cost for the project to offset the fine. So they do things like that, but I've not been able to get a clear picture. And so we have asked our inspector, and they provided us with documents from the last 5 years that she could easily get her hands on. Yes.
Okay, so if the bonds fail, what are the city's next steps?
That's a good question that we've not really explored much past today. You can continue to operate the West plant as it sits, and we can manage the fines and the overflow as best we can. But I don't know what's next, because with the inspection and the direction that we have to not only remediate the creek, but if we have an overflow like you see here on the ground at the plant, we are going to have to prevent that from happening, and we're going to have to hire those trucks that are $1,800 and some odd dollars for 8,000 gallons to be pulled out of our round section and hauled off before it overflows. So I can't answer that for you.
And to that point, Mr. Gann, how much would this be if we say wait 3 years?
Well, I can tell you that when the original bids for this plant were coming in, they were about $6 million roughly, I believe, to fix the whole plant or replace it, and now we're at 11. So, and that's in a 2 to 3 year time period. The longer we wait, the more it costs. Just a minute, let's get the microphone, please.
I appreciate this slide being up here because that's a great picture of kicking the can down the road. As council, we have talked about, there has been many great decisions and intentions of previous councils to get studies done, to put in the work, but it never can move forward, whether that is because of a lack of knowledge and understanding in the community of what is actually happening. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you. I've lived here for 19 years, and I've never had anyone talk to the community about what is happening and why. So I appreciate the forward thinking and the grit that it took for the staff to put this together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to refer back to that, the workshop meeting that you had on the Saturday and the sheets that you'd handed out that day. It had 3 different options on the west side, and I just wanted you to clarify. One was $3 million, one was $5 million, and then the other one was $8 million. And then, of course, the council ended up approving $11 million. So can you just kind of clarify the difference between those 3 different quotations that had the different figures on them?
Mm-hmm. So the basic amount, and I don't have the sheets in front of me, so I apologize for that, was to deal with the issues that TCEQ is bringing forward to us each and every time they come out. It did not fix a lot of work at the plants. It just did the bare minimum, if you think of it like that. So you've got basically, what can we do to potentially get by and have less problems with TCEQ? So that's in that lower number. The middle number was, and I don't know exactly what gains we were going to get, but it was going to have some slight improvements to the plant. We may still suffer from some overflow, but not probably as bad as we are now. And then the other number was to replace the plant. Yes, which has gone up exponentially the longer we wait. Yes. I'm assuming, I don't have those papers in front of me, so I don't recall the numbers.
Okay, there was a study back in 2010, and it was a very detailed study, and it was on our city and our surrounding cities, and it had a lot of good information to share about our city, and it gave us the plan of what was going to come all the way out to 3034. I'm sorry, 2034. So I see that we do a lot of studies. We put a lot of money and energy in our thinking process, but then we're not following through with what our plan is. And when we don't follow through with where our plan is, then we're not getting anything accomplished or done.
Correct.
So I've been told that 2010 study was very good and that it needs to be used if we plan to move forward in life. It's got a lot of good information that can help our city.
So I would agree with you that studies are extremely helpful. Anything that was published in 2010 is way dated at this point. We have a comprehensive plan that was put together 2019, Shana, that is dated now. Comprehensive plans are meant to be updated every 5 years, roughly, and so we're due. Matter of fact, council directed staff to pursue a grant through the Sustainable Communities Program where we would have someone come in and help us update that information, including residential predictions as it relates to how many residents we expect when. So if that gets awarded to us, it's already gone out in the paper, etc., then that will be a grant that the city receives that we won't have to pay for to gain a new update to that. So cities are very good about looking at that information, and I would say Rome has been in that category. They've, as we showed earlier, have had a lot of studies done, but we've not really executed any of them. Matter of fact, in the information I presented to council on the 10th of February, I showed the goals and objectives from that comprehensive plan and from some of those studies, and I listed the projects that we needed to do. None of them had been done.
Again, I appreciate the historic view that some members of our community can bring to the table. However, it is not 2010. It is not 2016. We don't need to be asking why manhole plugs were not placed or where we are in placing the plugs. We have to continue to move forward. And to the question, why was nothing done? I just think about council meetings that I've now sat in for the past year and the amount of time that council and staff have spent trying to address address the issues that are distracting from the main core work to provide for the whole of the community. So I would just ask if everyone leaves here with nothing else to please leave thinking forward, thinking about where we are now and what we want to be, what kind of voice we want to have, what kind of reputation we want to have, what we want people to think and see when they come to Rome, and not that historic view that they can find on the Wise County Messenger.
So thank you. One of the things that we'll be working with council on shortly after the elections, and as we kind of get some of the budget processes kicked off and the bonds determined which way we're going to go, is we'll be working with council to create a strategic plan for Rome, set a vision for the next 5 to 10 years, and set some goals and objectives for staff, because currently I don't have any per se. I know what needs to be done. As I've mentioned to you all, I've worked in city government as a city manager for many, many years. This is not new to me, and my love of Wise County is what drove me to Rome, because I could see what we could be when we grew up a little bit and when we kind of got our feet under us and we started heading in a particular direction. I will tell you all, you have an amazing team of public servants, from Court to Jesus to Shayna to Rex to Chief and Chief. You've got a great team that is poised to do so many wonderful things on your behalf. We just need the direction and the resources from which that the community wants to invest, and then we will get a lot of things done. Rome's potential is endless. Another question?
I just want to clarify, and I've got that PowerPoint pulled up from February 8th or whatever. The bond amount was for constructing, improving, extending city's sewer system, West wastewater treatment plant, repairs or replacement. It says 4.3 million to 11 million.
Right. We had a range of, that's why I say in the FAQs and why I've put out information to folks that the bond can't exceed 11 million, but it can be less. We cannot exceed voter authority, and we cannot use it for anything other than the plant, period.
Amanda, I think this is an important point on Prop C, your very first item on there. Would you mind reading that? Because I believe last time some seniors were given some false information, but I think that's a very good point to bring out for those that are listening.
Which one are you referring to, sir?
The Prop C, the one, what would happen to those?
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I think we've had some confusion about in the community. For those in our city who are disabled or over 65 and have a tax freeze associated with their property, this does not affect them. The only way it affects them is if they go out and they really remodel or add on to their house, and then their value changes tremendously, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And I know this because my husband's over 65 and we had that happen to us. So if your home stays the same and you don't go add another wing on the back of it, then this isn't going to affect you. Your tax rate is where it's at now. So it should not be an issue for elderly folks to wonder if they're going to get taxed out of their home. Their tax rate is set if they have applied for the over 65 tax exemption. Same thing for those who are disabled. If they have a percentage of disability on their tax that allows them to have a reduction, that stays the same. It's not going to change for them. So that's why we've put out the FAQs. As I mentioned, these have been looked at by our bond counsel because the city we are here to provide you with the facts and only the facts. We cannot make the decision for you, nor can we urge you one way or the other. This is your decision as a community. But what we want to make sure of is that you have the information you need to make that decision. You are the ones who live here. We work on behalf of your efforts, and we work on behalf of the community. So you all have the decision that needs to be made, and we will implement whatever decision we are given.
Amanda, I think you and your staff have done a wonderful job. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I, for one, I'm going to vote for all three of these bonds.
Thank you for the kind words.
Before we end this today, I just want to ask Jesse. Jesse, this goes back to you and your staff. What is it that you really need from the bond to help you better do your job the day in and day out on the west side, treatment plant, the east side, if there is a major snowstorm, and all the clay pipes bust, what is it that will help the city going forward?
Thank you,
That will
Ashley.
help your job.
I'm going to step in for him because this is one of those gray areas. We, as your professional staff team, have made these recommendations to council, but it's up to you all to decide. We cannot weigh in one way or the other than we have brought these projects forward because this is part of reinvesting in our infrastructure, but the community has to make the decision.
Thank you. Anything to meet the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality requirements is helpful. Now, keep it. That's it.
His license rests on whether or not he's compliant, and he won't do anything to be non-compliant because that's his profession and he is trained in this world, and that goes to the heart of who he is as an ethical individual. So we do everything we can to stay within those lanes that TCEQ gives us with equipment that is necessary. They're able to more effectively and efficiently do their job. There are other things that we talked about on that meeting with the council about equipment that's needed. The trucks, that they just received have been a godsend to them. There are some other equipment pieces that they need to get for roads that have nothing to do with the bonds that we'll be bringing forward to council as well for some consideration, because we need to do a better job of taking care of Rome. I understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what we want for you. The best of the best. Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone? Well, thank you for coming. I know that's a big time out of your Wednesday evening, so we appreciate you being here to weigh in and ask us the questions. And if you think of something thereafter, feel free to email me. Thank you.